Thank you for coming. I'm Emily Thompson. I'm Associate Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. So I will turn it over now to Professor Dani Belo, who can introduce the panel.
Thank you very much, first of all, for inviting us to present within the Big Questions series. And thank you very much, Professor Thompson, for the introduction. In terms of what we're going to be talking about today is very much focused on India's role in global affairs. And as we see in the news and in the current geopolitical environment, India is having an increasingly large impact, and we want to make sure that we capture that impact in a scholarly way. And we have, aside from myself, we have two very progressive thinkers in the foreign policy space. First, I'd like to introduce my co-panelist, Paul Hoeffken, who's an undergraduate student studying business administration at Webster, also working in the Global Policy Horizons Research Lab. And currently his focus is on the Baltic-Russia energy security and interdependence relationship. May I also add, he has put together one of the most interesting foreign policy decision-making models that he will present to you today. And his current focus also is on Russia's annexation of Crimea and the decision around that process. My other co-panelist is Saram Pulipaka, who's currently pursuing a master's degree in cybersecurity here at Webster. In addition to his technical background, he also has deep passion for international relations. And this passion is what drove him to enroll in a diploma program in international relations at the Indian Institute of Governance and Leadership in New Delhi, India, while also pursuing a bachelor's degree in computer science and engineering. His research covers a wide range of topics such as how India's role in the changing global order is changing India's foreign policy, posture, diplomatic relations with both China and Russia, the Middle East, and methods of combating terrorism, as well as the promotion of global peace and security and the application of nuclear deterrence theory in real-world situations. So we're in excellent company. Please, at the end of our talks, ask all the questions you'd like, and we'll do our very best to have a meaningful conversation about all of them. Thank you.
I created a foreign policy compass last semester, and I'm going to present it today. So what is the foreign policy compass? It is a 2x2 grid that consists of a x-axis and a y-axis. On the x-axis, you have cooperative to adversarial. And then on the y-axis, you have pragmatic to principled. The x-axis describes the friendliness of state A's decision towards state B. So is it cooperative? Is it friendly? Cooperative. Is it not friendly? Adversarial. The y-axis, which is pragmatic to principled, describes the logic and reasoning behind that decision making. So let me flip to my next slide. The origins of the foreign policy compass. I developed it last semester when I was reading a book by Agnia Grigas, in which she described two axes. And upon hearing this, I was like, well, what if we combine those axes into a 2x2 grid? I realized when I was doing this, she was talking about just the Baltic states and Russia. And then I thought, well, this could apply to a greater area than just that small relationship. So later in this presentation, Saram is going to use some of these ideas to see if it has universal applicability. All right, talking about the x-axis. So this is, like I said, this is the friendliness. So on the cooperative side, is it friendly? And this can be my example that I used was US and Ukraine. I describe those relationships as being friendly, but it can apply to other things too, like the US and Canada, or certain European relationships. And then adversarial. This is standoffish relationships where you have two states that do not get along. And this could be described as like historically US and the USSR, or today the US and Russia, or Israel and Palestine. Those are adversarial, not friendly. And on the y-axis, this is a little bit more complicated of an axis to describe. How do you describe principled and pragmatic? On the pragmatic side, this is the more complicated to identify out in the wild. This is policies that are put into place. Policies that are put into place not because the internal beliefs of state A align with the internal beliefs of state B, but because state A, which is implementing the policies, has run a cost-benefit calculation and has determined that acting in either a cooperative manner or adversarial manner to state B will be the best result geopolitically, or will yield them the greatest result geopolitically. And this is hard to identify out in the wild because oftentimes those internal decisions are hard to parse out the why. On the other side of that axis, you have principled. And these are a little bit easier to identify because it is a alignment of norms of the states, or either alignment or disalignment of norms. So this can be seen as like during the Cold War, it was very principled because you had the US as like capitalists, and we're like, we don't like communism. So the principles did not line up. Ergo, you had an adversarial principled conflict. And we can also see this on Israel's side too, or the US-Israel conflict, where it's we've stood by Israel, we're going to keep on standing by Israel. There's often on a principled side a more historical aspect to it, as in we've done this, we're going to continue doing this. This can be seen in US-Canada relations, where we've been friendly to Canada, we're going to continue to be friendly to Canada because our norms align. And this here is, I'm going to switch mics. This here is the foreign policy compass in its totality. For state A, you have the cooperative pragmatic. So this means that state A is enacting policies that are cooperative towards state B because it realizes that acting cooperatively will yield a better result. On the other flip side of this, over on B, you have adversarial pragmatic. We're not going to align with this state, not because we disagree with it with our norms and values, but because geopolitically this might be better for us, or it will be better for us according to their perceptions and calculations, because international relations is all about perceptions, that this will be the best result geopolitically. Down here for C, we have principled and adversarial. This is that classic, we don't like them because they're them and not us. US and Russia, US and USSR. And then principled and cooperative. This is, again, we like them, we agree with their norms and their values. We're going to continue to be friendly to them in our policies. And you may say, well, Paul, that's great, but what does this mean for me, a student or just an observer learning about this? Well, knowing this knowledge, armed with this knowledge, it will be easier for you students or people watching to say, okay, so this state is putting out this policy. Why is it putting out this policy? What does this mean for what does this mean for me? And it also removes the question, why would that state act in that way if they're allies? Because we see this sometimes in international relations, like a state may do something that goes against the grains of the ally. It may impose sanctions. Why is a state imposing sanctions on a state it's friendly with? This compass may be able to explain that. And it's also used to my hope for this compass is the use to standardize the language when discussing decisions between states and why policy decisions are made. All right, and that is the end of my section here. Sriram.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Saram Pulipaka, and today my presentation is going to be about India's foreign policy from proactive to reactive approach. So, what is the need of talking about India in 21st century? So, how world is going to get benefited from India's foreign policy, and what is the role of India? So, what role is India playing right now, and what role is India going to play in future? So, let's get with this. So, here, India is located in South Asia, just above the Indian Ocean. It's one of the 7th largest countries in the world, and it is also highest populated countries in the world. And India is having a very rich culture and heritage, and it is going back to around 5,000 years. And also, it is used to be one of the wealthiest nations up to 17th century until Britain invaded India in 17th century. And as a part of colonization, Britain ruled India over for 200 years. And it exploited resources worth around $45 trillion. Just imagine a nation being looted over for $45 trillion, and still today India is the 5th largest economy. And after exploiting 45, if Britain is what it is today, probably we can say it's because of India's wealth, but so many people don't like it, but it's the truth. And after getting independence in the year 1947, India had so many struggles, both politically and economically. And just like so many countries after World War II, India has to choose in between two superpowers. One is United States, another one is Soviet Union. And India here acted with a unique approach. It opted for a non-alignment approach. So this benefited India very much. So many countries, they are which is very hard for them to choose in between US and USSR. So then they acted in India's way. So they followed India from there. And after the year 1990, India made some economic reforms, globalization, it opened its markets globally. So many countries invested in India that benefited India very much. And along with this, India is having some geopolitical conflicts with both Pakistan and China up to today after the independence, thanks to British. And also the country is right now, it's actively engaging in so many international issues. Let's say Russia-Ukraine conflict, Israel-Hamas war, so many issues that India is actively participating in. So, guys, here it is British India. So it includes 4 countries totally. Here it is West Pakistan. Here it is East Pakistan. Here it is Burma. So Burma is what today we call as Myanmar, and East Pakistan is what today we call as Bangladesh, and Pakistan, this is West Pakistan, is what we call as Pakistan. British used this strategy called divide and conquer. So there are so many religions that originated from India. So Britain took advantage of those things, and they used this strategy to divide, and they want to create conflicts in between different religions that are staying in India. And last, they divided the country into three parts, that is India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, and Myanmar. And I don't know, like most of the people are not aware of it, but most of the religions are originated from India. Let's say Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Sikhism. All these religions are originated from India. And India is a Hindu majority country, and then followed by Islam and then Christianity. And it's the beauty of India. So like different different people from different religions live together, eat together, party together. Like they'll all stay together no matter what the consequences. And India is one of the world's largest democracies. Uh, so that's the beauty of India. And this is India's map. It consists of three colors: saffron, white, and green, where saffron indicates India's courage and strength, white indicates its peace, with Dharma Chakra included in middle of it. It's about truth. And at last, we have green, like it shows the country's agriculture and its prosperity and its fertility growth. So after getting independence in the year 1947, as I said, India opted for non-alignment approach. It did not take anyone's sides, and it was also having some economic struggles and political struggles. And in the year 1965 and 1971, because of Kashmir conflict with Pakistan and Doklam conflict with China, India went with war with both these countries. And during this time, like a new friendship began with the Soviet Union. Even though India and Russia, they both are having relations from 1950, as India opted for non-alignment approach. During these wars, China supported Pakistan along with United States and United Kingdom, France, Saudi, and so many countries. So India had to reach out to some country who supports them internationally. So that one friend is Russia. So from decades, India and Russia are having relationships, and USSR helped India during these wars, and at last India won in those wars, but it showed some bad effect on country's economy. And during 1990, after the collapse of Soviet Union, India's best friend, India had to change its economic reforms in order to cope up with the changing global order. So it made some economic reforms which helped other countries to invest in India from the year 1990s. And from the year 2014, like let's say it's a golden era for India. So under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, from 2014, India reached its golden heights right now. So each and every country in the world are giving respect to India under his leadership because of India's foreign diplomacy and its unique approach and its fairness and its friendliness with each and every country, regardless of their status, rich, poor, medium, anything. So India is trying to gain a good relationships with all these countries together. That's what makes India so special. So modern day India's foreign policy. So right now, India is actively engaging in so many international groups, let's say BRICS, Quad, G20, SCO, Shanghai Corporation Organization. So India is actively participating in all these groups along with so many countries. India is building a network with whole Asia, European countries, as well as North American countries. And India is one of the first nations in the world to send their satellite to the South Pole. So that shows how advanced India is going to be the future. So also India is trying to help poor nations in the world. Let's say during COVID-19, when many nations stopped their vaccines going abroad, India is the only nation in the world that sent its vaccines to over 200 countries. So that's a big deal for so many poor nations in Africa, Asia, as well as North and South America region. And so future of Indian foreign policy. So right now, India is having a good status in the world, but it changes with some global order. Let's say right now there are so many things, bad things that are going around the world. Let's say US-China trade conflict, Israel-Hamas war, and China's aggression over Taiwan, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So there are so many issues that are going right now. So India is trying to cope up with every aspect, and it is trying to balance each and everything internationally by extending their hand to other countries, by seeing each and everyone equally. And US-China trade conflict in the 21st century, just like Cold War, it's going to take a big turn. So it's going to benefit India in some ways. In what ways? So as you know, like China is the industrial hub of the world. So many countries are having their industries in China. And after the conflict, US-China's trade conflict, so many tech giants like Apple, Amazon, they are shifting their industries from China to India. So this can help India to grow economically, and it can hugely benefit India's industrial sector. And India is also trying to create a connected corridor between East and West. So it is trying to create a corridor with 4 countries. Like I'll show you the slides. Here is Nepal, here is Bhutan, here is India, and India is trying to gather all these countries, and it is trying to create a corridor that can transport the goods from East and this West. And via sea route, it can be transferred to North America. So India is trying to create a trade route like this, which can be beneficial for all these countries. And India aims to create a foreign policy right now. It can be benefited to each and every country. So it is actively participating in the international organizations to help poor nations in Africa as well as Asia. And India is also trying to bid for UN permanent seat, but somehow because of conflict with China, India is not able to receive it yet, but in future it might be. So there is a special chapter for India and Russia's relations. So as I said you earlier, during the conflict with China and Pakistan, India had to reach out to some friend, and that's Soviet Union. It benefited greatly both the nations, and up to date, they are very they are very friendly with each other. And right now, Russia is actively engaging with India after the invasion of Ukraine. So after the invasion of Ukraine, there is a huge demand for crude oil for each and every country in the world, especially Europe. So during that time, Russia offered crude oil to India for a very less price, and India used the same crude oil to export for Europe to reduce energy crisis. So this is very useful for. So it saved Europe from kind of energy crisis. So there is a huge demand for each and every other resource, oil, gas, petroleum, and Russia is ready to sell all those resources to India for a very less price. And India is importing all those things and kind of exporting the same things to the rest of the world at a fair price. So it benefits India as well as the rest of the world. So that's because Russia's friendship with India. And Russia also helped India build its first nuclear weapon. So India is the first nation in the world that developed a nuclear weapon apart from the United Nations. And Russia helped India with this. And during that time, so many Western countries like US, France, and so many countries imposed sanctions on the India. But because of Soviet Union, it helped India a lot. So that's the reason so many Indians call Soviet Union or Russia as a time-tested ally of India. So as earlier Paul explained about the foreign policy compass. So right now there are two countries that India is having conflict with. with China and Pakistan. So in cooperative approach, so both India and Pakistan, uh, they both are actively engaging in humanitarian issues, and they are seeking out each other to mutual benefits. And with China, India is China's largest importer of goods. So they both have a very good economic ties apart from the conflicts. And during 2020, during a conflict with China, India banned around 59 to 60 apps from China, which includes top apps like TikTok and so many other Chinese apps. So India is the only nation to ban 60 Chinese apps in the world. And in pragmatic, right now, both the countries are actively engaging in some small trade deals. And during sometimes, like let's say in the year 2016, 2018, every time India is approaching to Pakistan, they want to build some ties with Pakistan because of some terrorism conflicts. It's not going further, but they want to put all this aside. They want to somehow improve trade relations for benefit of both the countries and people. And with the China, India is also actively engaging in climate changes issues. And adversarial, India is having conflict with Pakistan from 1947 in Kashmir issue. It can't be resolved up to now because of so many issues. Like Kashmir is a region where it's having huge natural resources, and it belonged to India from decades, and Pakistan wants it, but right now it's a huge conflict between these two countries. As well as China, it's having some border conflicts in the Galwan Valley with China. And principled like India, China, and Pakistan, these three countries are not ready to lose a single bit of their land because they respect their country's sovereignty and their integrity, and they don't want to lose any of those territories that belongs to them. So this is BRICS. BRICS is the next big thing that's going to happen in the world. BRICS includes 5 countries: Brazil, Russia, China, India, and South Africa. In these 5 countries, 3 countries are trillion-dollar countries, and they have a huge economies. They are kind of rivalry towards G7, and they are trying to create economic and investment opportunities in between these countries. And they also want to extend neighborhood to the countries which are not included in the G7. Let's say in the 2024, some countries like Argentina, Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, and Ethiopia, these countries are planned to join in BRICS because they are not dominated by the G7 countries, and because of as Paul mentioned earlier, like sometimes the Western countries are imposing sanctions on so many other nations, let's say in Asia. So all these countries wanted to join BRICS to dominate global currencies such as dollars or euro. And somehow things are not going further in the BRICS because of India and China's war in some kind of issues. And this is Quad. This is a group that includes 4 countries: India, Japan, USA, and Australia. So this is Indo-Pacific region. The main aim of the Quad is to create a safe trade routes between Asia and America, and also to tackle China's aggression in South China Sea as well as Indo-Pacific region. And these countries are providing some financial assistance to the countries which are being trapped by China's debt policy. And India behind China is playing India, which is beside China, is a main key role because we don't know, like China may show its military strength anytime. So India is the only nation which can tackle China in the Asia's region. So all the Quad countries are right now actively engaging in Indo-Pacific region. They are creating a safe trade routes. They are providing some financial and healthcare system. They are providing healthcare systems to some poor nations in the Indo-Pacific region. And here it is G20. G20 is a group that consists of 20 countries, along with India and Spain as a permanent guest. And the main aim of G20 countries is focused on environmental conservation, global economic improvement, achieving development goals, technological advancements, enhancing international organizations, promoting women's participation in the development. So recent G20 summit was held at New Delhi in the year 2023. And during that summit, some major decisions were taken by these G20 countries. They want to create a trade route in between Asia to North America via Middle East and Europe. So this kind of, it's kind of connecting all the countries from India, Saudi, UAE, Israel, Europe, and last USA. So it also fueled, it also a little bit fueled Israel and Hamas war during this, after this summit, because if this trade has to happen, Israel and Saudi Arabia, they have to get along with each other. So there's a peace deal in between Saudi and Israel during this summit, because they want to establish a trade route between India and USA. And somehow Hamas or Gaza, they don't like it much. So that kind of fueled the issue between Israel and Hamas. At last, now we know what is happening in Israel and Hamas. It's very bad. And they also want to create a global biofuel alliance to provide, to decrease the oil rates. And this is the last one. And right now, like India, as I said, like India is actively engaging in so many other issues like Russia-Ukraine's war and Israel-Hamas war. So in future, India is the only one like who can help in, USA and the other nations from China's aggression in Indo-Pacific area as well as the rest of the world. So there's a saying like in India, like if the India grows, the world grows. So India is a nation in the world that is trying to balance connections in between Eastern countries and Western countries. So if India grows, then it can be very, very helpful for the world. So thank you. Professor Dani will take over from here.
What I'd like to finish our presentation with is situating these broader trends that my co-panelists identified in a very specific phenomenon that seems to dominate international affairs, and especially the security community on an international scale. And it's actually part of my own research that I'd like to mention, because basically, when we're examining this type of phenomenon of trying to cooperate across centers of power, so in 2020, I co-authored a piece with David Carman from Ottawa, and we looked at international affairs and we said, well, it doesn't look like the bloc system is as rigid as it used to be, especially during the Cold War. In other words, there's every incentive for all members of the international community to cooperate across centers of power. There are very few nations in the world today that only cooperate with what we perceive to be their traditional alliances. So competitive multilateralism, ultimately, when we're talking about India's behavior, and as we heard from Paul and Sriram, it cooperates with the transatlantic community, but it also wants to cooperate with China, even though it has an adversarial relationship with China. It also wants to cooperate with Israel, but also have a relationship with the Palestinian Authority. And that is part of competitive multilateralism. In other words, you're able to work with many, but also compete. And this is the phenomenon that seems to dominate international affairs today. So ultimately, this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's a format of international relations which members of political blocs or alliances cooperate across centers of power. And I would argue, and as my colleagues would argue as well, India embodies that competitive multilateralism principle. In other words, it cooperates in terms of energy resources with Russia. At the same time, it has a very robust relationship with the United States, both economically, politically. At the same time, it imports weapons from Russia, some of the most sophisticated weapons in the world. And ultimately, it's challenging a lot of our institutions that have been around since the end of the Second World War. For example, as Sriram pointed out, the BRICS system, right? It contains two of the largest economies in the world that are there trying to challenge the post-Cold War hegemony of the United States. However, this system of international relations is prone to conflict. And this is where the challenge for diplomats really is. And for you, future policymakers, we're going to be having to clean up a lot of the mess that's been created through the competitive multilateral system. So ultimately, what we're likely to observe is large-scale conflict. Doesn't necessarily mean war, but very adversarial relations. And there are a number of formats. If India continues cooperation with the US, adversaries of the US are not going to like that. And they're going to try to pressure India to abandon those relationships. From our perspective here in the transatlantic community, if India continues cooperating with Russia and importing Russian energy, this is going to create friction between us and India. Ultimately, we will have to navigate this environment, especially an environment where competitive multilateralism is the format of relationships. If we're looking at examples, what we can expect, we may see the transatlantic security community putting more pressure, whether it's economic pressure, political pressure, or both, trying to isolate India potentially. India will have to navigate this environment because the idea from our perspective would be if India continues to cooperate across geopolitical axes, then they get the most benefit compared to us. So this is really a relative gains kind of mindset that's at play. For example, some of the statistics that I wanted to show you, specifically speaking to energy policy. For example, after Russia's intervention in Ukraine in February 2022, India began importing significant numbers of barrels of oil. Not only crude oil, but also refining Russian oil, therefore gaining a lot of monetary benefit from the refined product. And we can see on this graph that 51% of Russian oil is actually going to India now. If we're looking at it statistically, since the intervention in Ukraine, India's import of Russian oil jumped 25-fold. 25-fold. And on an annual basis, India is actually saving $2.7 billion because of the drop in the price of oil plus the monetary benefits they get from reselling cheaper Russian oil. How is the US going to react to that? How is the transatlantic community going to react to that in the coming years? We'll see, but for now we know we don't like it. This is where I will end it. Thank you very much for your attention. Hopefully this was a sufficient summary.